the Master Confirmation Annex is intended to assist with documenting certain types of stock loans that aren't vanilla, but are fairly common in practice, with the idea of creating greater uniformity and avoiding the need for reviewing and negotiating detailed bespoke confirmations for each such transaction. And until now, dealers that want to enter into these types of transactions have tended to use their own pro forma documentation that's kind of intended to achieve the same result, but can vary quite a bit in the detailed drafting. And this has been an impediment to quickly and efficiently agreeing these loans with agent lenders and others. We'll go through the MCA in a bit more detail, but first of all, starting right at the beginning, kind of the architecture of the Master Confirmation Annex. The basic idea is that the Master Confirmation Annex sets out standard provisions for the various types of transaction, and then you document the terms of the specific transaction through making various elections or filling in the economic details in the confirmation. And there should be no need to modify or negotiate the terms of the MCA at all. And the MCA is an annex to the relevant GMSLA between the parties. And in the confirmation, that relevant GMSLA will be identified, so that avoids any confusion. It happened to be more than one type of GMSLA between the two counterparties. You know which is the relevant GMSLA for the purpose to which the MCA is going to be an annex. And because the MCA is standardized, the only place where the MCA has anything for the parties to complete or any options to choose from is on the front page. So if you've got it to hand, you could look at the first page of the annex, and there's two sets of language in square brackets, the first two paragraphs, and then the next three paragraphs. So in terms of the options for entering into a transaction to which the MCA applies, the first option would be that the parties document each such transaction by executing a confirmation, and the confirmation would follow the form of the confirmation that's set out at the back of the MCA, and the confirmation will expressly say that it incorporates the MCA. Now, if you do that, you've got your confirmation that cross-refers to the MCA, and you've no need to execute the MCA itself. And that's how that's catered for by the first couple of paragraphs on this page. In that case, as I say, there's no need to actually execute the MCA between the parties, but we've assumed that to create sufficient contractual certainty, the parties would execute the confirmation for each such transaction. And if you do it that way, you've got your confirmation. You don't actually need to attach the MCA to it, but depending on your counterparty and how familiar they are with the document, it may be useful as a practical matter to do so. And if you do attach the MCA, it would make sense to remove the drafting notes and to remove the paragraphs that deal with the other option of executing the MCA, which I'll come on to in a moment, but I don't think it's essential. If you just attach the pro forma MCA, that would be sufficient. Now, the other way of entering into transactions to which the MCA applies is that the parties will sign up to the MCA up front, and then each transaction under the MCA will be documented by a confirmation. Again, the confirmation would be in the form set out at the back of the MCA and incorporate the MCA by reference. The confirmation will be issued by one party to the other, but in this case, where you've already signed up to the MCA, we've assumed that in line with sort of what's pretty current market practice, you wouldn't actually sign each confirmation. Instead, and this is built into the MCA, if the party that's received the confirm disagrees with anything in it, it's required to raise that with the sending party, and otherwise the the confirmation will be effective. And to avoid a battle of the forms between the parties, we've also provided in the MCA that an agreement between the parties as to which one of them will send out the confirm for transactions to be carried out under the MCA. So that gives, I think, a certain amount of flexibility to reflect whatever your current market practice is for documenting transactions, whether you want to execute a sort of long form confirmation or whether you just want to sign up the MCA and then make each confirmation as friendly and just send out on a one-way basis, as you probably do currently. Now, while the form of confirm at the back of the MCA is quite lengthy, by the time that the provisions that aren't relevant to the particular transaction have been removed, as well as all the drafting notes, the actual confirmation for the transaction should be much shorter. So it shouldn't end up being a daunting, 15-page document. It should be relatively short. As Jamie said, we've designed the form of confirm so that although it can be used in paper form, a digital version will also be produced. And if you do use the digital version and you're going through it and filling in, if a row is selected as not being applicable, that row and any other rows that become irrelevant as a result of that will be automatically removed. So that should make the process of filling in the confirm much more straightforward. So that's all I wanted to say on the sort of architecture, as it were. And now I'll hand over to Ria to start walking through the sort of substance of the MCA.
Thanks, Pauline. So turning to the operative sections now of the MCA, and firstly looking at section 1, which sets out the first category of transaction type catered for in the MCA, which are loans with a specified tenor. So there are 4 types of loan tenor contemplated by the MCA, and the tenor that is applicable to the loan governed by a confirmation can be specified in the confirmation under the header loan tenor. And note that only one tenor can be applied in respect of a loan under a confirmation. So the first loan tenor is on demand, and it allows either party to terminate the relevant loan at any time by giving notice to the other party, pursuant to the termination provisions of the relevant GMSLA specified to apply. And then for the other 3 types of tenor, fixed term, evergreen, and extendable, the starting point is that the loan terminates on the scheduled termination date, which is a date specified in the confirmation. So firstly, fixed term loans. So these straightforwardly terminate in the absence of any event of default or additional termination event on the scheduled termination date. Then we have evergreen loans, which operate such that whilst they will terminate on the scheduled termination date, the scheduled termination date will be automatically adjusted to roll forward on each reset date by a specified amount of time called evergreen period. But this is provided that either party, unless either party has served a notice to terminate, which we call the non-extension notice. And the effect of such non-extension notice is to essentially stop the scheduled termination date from being further adjusted, such that the loan will terminate on that scheduled termination date. And one point to note here is that if any loan fee is payable in respect of that loan, then it may also be reduced in accordance with an agreed reduction methodology specified in the confirmation as a result of the evergreen feature terminating. And the elections to be made in this regard in the confirmation are for the reset dates and for the evergreen period. And the final loan tenor are extendable loans, which, unlike evergreen loans, will terminate on the scheduled termination date, unless notice is given that the term of the loan should be extended by length of time called the reset period. And here parties will have the ability to specify in the confirmation which party has the right to extend the term of the loan via the election for extending party. So the tenors that we have just talked about are always subject to the occurrence of an event of default or additional termination event occurring prior to the scheduled termination date, in which case the relevant terms of the GMSLA, or in the case of additional termination events, that the terms of Section 8 of the MCA will apply. Moving on then to Section 2, which sets out the second type of transaction contemplated by the MCA, which are those with a certain specified loan size. So as with the loan tenors that we just talked about, the loan size applicable to a loan entered into under a confirmation can be specified in the confirmation. So where parties do not wish to fix the size of a loan, the no fixed amount loan size should be specified, as this means that the parties do not need to maintain the size of the loan to any monetary amount. Where parties do wish to fix the loan size, two options are available. So the parties could fix the market value of loaned securities that the lender agrees to lend out to the borrower by specifying fixed loan to apply, and then further specifying a monetary loan fixed amount in the confirmation, in respect of which the market value of securities may not fall short of. However, where the market value of securities is in fact lower than the loan fixed amount, the lender will need to deliver additional eligible securities to the borrower to increase the market value to at least the loan fixed amount. And vice versa, if the market value exceeds the loan fixed amount, then the borrower will need to redeliver equivalent securities to reduce the market value to the loan fixed amount. And one important point to note here is that the obligation of either party to deliver eligible or equivalent securities is contingent on notice being given by the other party specifying the amount of the excess or shortfall, whichever is applicable. So the alternative option for fixing the loan size is for parties to fix the amount of cash collateral that the borrower has to post against the loan of securities, and parties can do this by specifying the fixed cash collateral loan size to apply. This time, the threshold against which the market value of loan securities is measured is called the required securities value, and is calculated by dividing the cash collateral fixed amount by the agreed collateral percentage, both of which should be specified in the confirmation. As for fixed loans, where the market value is lower than or greater than the required securities value, the lender or borrower shall deliver additional eligible securities or equivalent securities as applicable to correct the shortfall or the excess, and again delivery is contingent on notice being given. So a couple of points to note on the fixed cash collateral feature. So this concept is separate to the margining provisions of the GMSLA, and so paragraph 5 of the GMSLA shall not apply to a fixed cash collateral loan. And in addition, since the purpose of a fixed cash collateral loan is for the lender of the securities to access funding, it would not make sense to effect such a loan under a GMSLA pledge, i.e. the 2018 version of GMSLA. And a final point to note is that where the lender or borrower fails to comply with its delivery or redelivery obligations during the tenor of a fixed cash collateral loan, then upon written notice by the other party, the failure shall constitute an event of default. So now moving on to the next section of the MCA, which deals with the substitution of principles, where a loan entered into under a confirmation is a pooled principal agency loan. So under the 2010 version of the GMSLA, there's an option for the lender to act as agent for more than one third party in respect of one or more loans. And so section 3 deals with scenarios in which lender is acting as agent for one or more principals, and in its capacity as agent has entered into a loan on behalf of one or more. So what the MCA provides is for the substitution of any principals on whose behalf the agent has entered into a loan, in which case the agent will reallocate all or part of the relevant loan to a new approved principal. So an approved principal could be a principal which is part of a predetermined group of principals agreed to by the borrower, and in respect of which the borrower has not withdrawn its approval. And this election can be made by specifying as per agency annex in the confirmation. Or the alternative is for an approved principal to be a principal for which the borrower has specifically notified the agent of its approval of such principal in respect of such loan. And this election can be made by applying as per borrower approval under the Substitution of Principles heading. So the difference between the two is that the latter requires the borrower to give its approval for each principal for each loan, whereas the former relies on a pre-agreed list of principals which the borrower has approved entry into a loan with. And a last point on section 3. So section 3 also clarifies that any obligations of the lender to correct a shortfall of securities, depending on the loan size of the transaction specified to apply, which we talked about just now. So these will be obligations of the lender in its capacity as agent, rather than obligations of any principal on whose behalf the agent has entered into. And so this is primarily intended to ensure that the obligations of lender to correct a shortfall are met by lender as agent and do not fall on any principal which may be substituted in or out of the loan allocation. So with that, I'll now hand back over to Pauline to take us through the next couple of sections.
Thanks, Ria. So section 4 is dealing with what are the loan securities for the purposes of the loan transaction. And section 4 gives the parties the flexibility either to list out in the confirmation what the initial securities being loaned on the settlement date will be, or just for the parties to agree that the securities that will be delivered on the settlement day must be eligible securities. And this may be particularly relevant to reverse stock loans, where the borrower is unlikely to care about the identity of the specific loan securities as long as they are of sufficient eligibility. Now, as for what eligible securities are, well, the type of eligible securities will either be specified in the confirmation, and again, that could be a list of securities, or it could be ratings criteria, etc., whatever the parties want to negotiate. Or alternatively, the confirmation will provide that eligible securities means the securities that are included from time to time in an agreed collateral profile maintained by a tri-party agent or custodian. And you would do that presumably if you were using a tri-party agent or using the custodian with respect to that particular transaction. So those are the options for what the loan securities would be. Moving on to section 5, this is dealing with substitutions of loan securities. Now, the GMSLA itself obviously caters for the borrower being able to substitute collateral by alternative collateral acceptable to the lender, but it doesn't contemplate the securities that are the loan securities actually being replaced during the term of the loan. However, under the MCA, we're probably dealing with loans that won't be terminable on demand, but will be expected to continue in place for a period of time. And being able to substitute the loan securities in certain circumstances may be important to one or both parties. So section 5 sets out, really various scenarios that the parties may wish to elect for in the confirmation. 5A is dealing with a case where the loan securities cease to be eligible securities. Now, in this case, either party can give notice for the securities to be substituted by eligible securities. And this is not something that you need to specifically elect for in the confirmation. This is something that will apply. By contrast, the rest of Section 5 is dealing with things that will only apply if chosen by the parties in the confirmation. Section 5b covers a case where one or both parties wants a right to require substitution of loaned securities, even though the loaned securities are still eligible securities. And to achieve this, you would need to elect for eligible securities substitution in the confirmation. And the party with the right to substitute will also be specified in the confirmation as the ES substitution party. So again, only relevant if elected. Section 5C is intended to cover a situation where a party wants the right to switch the loan to a different type of securities. For example, the borrower has borrowed a pool of equities, but may in certain circumstances want to borrow high quality government bonds instead. And again, to achieve this, you would need to elect in the confirmation for alternative securities substitution to be applicable, and obviously specify what the alternative securities are. And again, you would select which is the party that has the right to switch to alternative securities, and that would all be done by elections in the confirmation. And if none of this, if this is not relevant, then the relevant rows can just be removed from the confirmation altogether, so they're not there and sort of clogging up the document. And finally, section 5D is another election that could be made in the confirmation, and it allows the parties to agree on one or more events other than the loan securities becoming ineligible, that if it occurred would enable a party to require loan securities to be substituted. Now, no such substitution events have been sort of drafted or hardwired into the Master Confirmation Annex or the confirmation, so it would be up to the parties to specify in the confirmation what the substitution event would be. And as an example, if the criteria for what are eligible securities didn't deal with events such as a ratings downgrade or nationalisation or something like that, the parties might want to say that it would be a substitution event, and then specify which party had the right to require a substitution. Now, in any of these cases, the final paragraph of Section 5 is dealing with the timing for the substitution to take place. And the key point to note is that delivery by lender back to borrower is dependent on borrower having delivered to lender securities equivalent to the loan securities. So just to be clear that lender only has to deliver if borrower has delivered its side of the agreement. So moving on to section 6, this is very short. This is really just provides any loan fee and any rates applicable to cash collateral will be as set out in the confirmation. And as already mentioned, the confirmation may also cater for the loan fee to be increased or decreased in certain circumstances. For example, as Ria explained, if a party to an Evergreen loan gives notice not to continue it further, that could that could lead to a decrease in the loan fee for the remaining period of the loan. Now, section 7 and the related elections in the confirmation deal with collateralization of the loan, and I hope they're actually fairly self-explanatory. The various elections cater for uncollateralized loans, for bilateral loans, which are just loans where the collateral is simply posted in accordance with the GMSLA, and also for fixed cash collateral loans, which Ria sort of talked about, and also for a situation where there is a pledge GMSLA or any other GMSLA where you use a tri-party agent in relation to posting of collateral, where the eligible securities collateral can be as set out in a collateral profile maintained by the custodian or tri-party agent. Now, all the various methods of collateralization are set out in the confirmation, and of course only one form of collateralization should be elected per loan. So I think I can hand back to Ria just for the last couple of sections of the MCA.
Thanks, Pauline. So we'll move on to section 8, additional termination events. And so this section allows for parties to specify these additional events to apply with respect to a loan, in addition to the events of default, which are already set out in the relevant GMSLA. So in section 8, we set out the most common ATEs that a party could specify to a loan, and these are borrower termination election, which allows the borrower to elect to terminate the loan at any time, subject to payment of a loan breakage fee. And then we have illegality and force majeure as well, which are defined in the usual way. One point to note with respect to applying force majeure and possibly illegality as additional termination events is that if such an event does occur, it likely will not be possible for the parties to redeliver the loan securities or collateral as the ATE contemplates upon termination of the loan. And so parties may wish to bear this in mind when considering whether to apply these additional termination events. Note that for all of the ATEs that we specify in section 8, in order to exercise such termination rights, the terminating party has to give written notice to the other party of the occurrence of the relevant event. And we should also point out that these are not, of course, the only additional termination events that can be specified to a loan. Parties can specify any other additional termination events to apply in the field called other additional termination events in the confirmation. So with that, and moving on to the final section of the MCA, and which should be fairly self-explanatory, but section 9 sets out the common business day conventions that could be specified to apply in respect of a loan, such that if any relevant date falls on a day that is not a business day under the MCA or the GMSLA for the relevant purpose, and the relevant day will be adjusted in accordance with the convention specified. So broadly speaking, for the following business day convention, the relevant date will be adjusted to be the first following day that's a business day for such purpose. For a modified following business day, the adjustment will be to the first following day that is a business day, unless that day falls in the next calendar month, in which case the relevant day will be the first preceding day that's a business day for that purpose. And the last option set out in section 9 is preceding business day convention, under which the adjustment will be to the first preceding day that is a business day for such purpose. And so we've discussed the key features provided for in the MCA. However, if parties wish to agree further bespoke terms for a loan which are not covered by sections 1 to 9, as just discussed, then there is a field at the very end of the form of confirmation at the back of the MCA titled Other Provisions, which can be used by parties to set out any other terms that apply to a loan.